What's going on, FA Nation? Welcome back. First edition of Fantasy Alarm's 2-minute drill for the 2022 NFL season. I'm Dan Malin. I'm joined by James Babyface Grande following week one. Grande, how did week one go for you? Or are you just kind of letting it all sink in that football's finally back?
Dan, I can't lie to you. I had a fantastic week one.
Yeah?
And by that, I mean, I didn't necessarily win $1 million. I didn't even win $1,000. I didn't even win all that much money. But you know what I did, Dan? I watched my New York Giants start 1-0. I watched my New York Football Giants start the year 1-0. They were coming into yesterday's game. They were 1-11 the last 12 years in openers. I know that that's not something that you've experienced much in your lifetime, probably your whole life. Your whole lifetime. But it's something that I've put up with for over a decade now. And you know what? It just feels good to be over 500. Like, I can't express to you how great that feels. Plus, I think I won in every league. It's week one, but I think I'm undefeated in all my leagues. Granted, there's best ball leagues and all that stuff that a lot of time to go, but good overall week. Cash and DFS. You and I talked about that yesterday. Giants won a lot of fan. Nothing wrong on this end, my man. Nothing wrong on this end so far.
Yeah, I think the only downside for my week was that I just had to watch all my preconceived notions about the Patriots just come true because they look absolutely terrible. And granted, I think heading into Sunday, they were like 2-7 in Miami in their last 9 games, and they looked so bad. That offense is going to be atrocious to watch all season long. But aside from the Patriots, I had a pretty solid week. We were talking about like the cash line yesterday, and even though I took a slight loss in DFS, overall I felt really good about the DFS reads. I think my one mistake was pivoting off Saquon Barkley at the very end, right before lineup lock. Obviously that paid huge, and I still had plenty of shares of him in GPPs, but he wasn't my cash game lineup. And then I made the terrible decision to take him out, and so that. It's not like my cash lineup wasn't bad. I put up like 150, 354 points, but that wasn't cashing in every single one of my double ups. It finished way below the cut line in the $10, multi-entry double up on DraftKings, and that contest was just filled with a lineup train.
Right.
So again, I had a decent week. Max entered the 50-cent mini max on DraftKings, so we'll see how that goes tonight. But I'm glad that you decided to, wave the Giants flag a little bit, because I feel like among winners and losers for week one, we can really just turn our attention to, Saquon Barkley of the New York Giants. The spread offense and everything for him. First of all, he's healthy, and this is a scheme that can benefit him and get him back to the player that he was when he first broke into the league. What is Saquon Barkley's upside? I know it's very well, RB1. So I guess what is the floor? Is there a safe, top 5 running back in fantasy football rest of season for Saquon Barkley?
I mean, I really don't want it to sound like my fandom is like shining through when I say this, because it's not. Like, obviously I'm excited. He looked fantastic. But I think when Saquon Barkley is fully healthy, they addressed the offensive line the last few years. He could be the overall RB1. And I don't know if that's like a hot take. I don't know if that's crazy, but like, we just need the guy to be on the field. He has a season under his belt with 2,000 all-purpose yards. He has a season under his belt with 100 targets. Like, he led the Giants in targets yesterday. Not only did he dominate on the ground, he was great through the air. So like, again, I don't think there's like, I'm not going to sit here and say like, yes, Saquon Barkley is the unequivocal RB1. But when you're talking about, like you just said, like, there's a ceiling. I think the ceiling is RB1. And if he stays healthy, he is a RB5 or better. I think him and Christian McCaffrey do a lot of the same things. I think Saquon's a better runner. I think McCaffrey is probably better in the passing game and will get more volume there than Saquon. But I do think the ceiling is RB1. Again, last year, you want to talk about like how people are injury prone and whatnot. I mean, he stepped on someone's ankle going over the middle for a pass. That's just so unfortunate. That's very unlucky. And things like that happen in football. But right now, Saquon Barkley, 18 carries, 164 yards. He looked explosive. He looked patient. He looked awesome. So I think that the ceiling is RB1. I think the floor is RB5 if we get a full season of Saquon.
I do want to turn our attention briefly to the Philadelphia Eagles Detroit Lions games because 2 big winners came away from this one, arguably 3. But I mean, Jalen Hurts was already being drafted as an elite quarterback, but his connection with AJ Brown was on full display. Hurts on 29 targets, Brown had 13 of them for 10 catches and 155 yards. Nobody else had more than 4 targets rather, for the Philadelphia Eagles. And on the other side of the ball, DeAndre Swift looked so awesome. If it wasn't for Jamal Williams, basically stealing 2 touchdowns, Swift could have had an even bigger day. I do have some concerns that they're going to just be using Williams at the goal line. But Swift on 15 carries had 144 yards, a touchdown, and he caught 3 passes. I've seen some people talking about trying to sell high on DeAndre Swift, but I'm of the mindset he
absolutely not.
He could legitimately catch 60 to 70 passes, maybe even more in this offense. So I don't really know why you'd really look to sell when you got him at a relatively decent price. You got an RB1 in the second round when every other running back in week 1, for the most part, was an absolute dud. It was a big week for receivers taken in round 1. But overall, what are your thoughts? What were your big takeaways from this game? Because, I mean, it had 73 total points. Both offenses looked very good. I think the Eagles may have lost Derek Barnett for the season. But overall, very entertaining game, and I'm excited for all my Jalen Hurts shares. I don't have a ton of A.J. Brown, but I do have a moderate amount of DeAndre Swift, a lot of Jalen Hurts. Loved how these 2 offenses came together and just put on an absolute show.
Yeah, so I'll just start. I guess I'll just start with the Swift thing, right? Because I feel like that's just blasphemy. I mean, we're selling a guy who last year, I mean, you mentioned that we're talking about 70 targets. He had 78 targets in just 13 games last year. So, again, we're not going to be predictive of injury. If he's healthy the full year and he plays 17 games, who's to say DeAndre Swift isn't approaching 100 targets? Looks like an improved runner as well. 4.1 yards per carry last year. I think there's obviously room for growth, 150 carries. So he had over 200 touches last year. He had over 1,000 yards. He had 7 touchdowns, and he was battling injuries, and that was in 13 games. What are we selling? What are we doing? Block all those people. Get them off your Twitter feed. You'll be better off as a fantasy player. For anyone trying to sell DeAndre Swift, just because Jamal Williams poached touchdowns. Listen, Jamal Williams poached touchdowns last year, and DeAndre Swift still went at end of first, early second in almost all your drafts. So clearly we weren't really thinking about, or we knew the possibility was there about Jamal Williams, still took him that early. In terms of Philly, look, you and I on this podcast last year crapped on Jalen Hurts, the quarterback. And I don't necessarily think he did anything to really change my outlook on him in game 1. He is a very potent fantasy quarterback who clearly got an upgrade at the skill position in A.J. Brown. And that paid dividends right away. But he's going to be good in fantasy because he runs like he ran in week 1. Now, the problem becomes we saw 4 different running backs in Philly rush the football into the end zone. Well, 4 different players. I should just say running backs because that's Jalen Hurts still is to me. But, it is what it is. Those touchdowns to Jalen Hurts could go to Sanders or go to Gainwell or go to Boston Scott. But, I mean, you have to like that we saw 17 carries out of Jalen Hurts in week 1. They're obviously the offense really didn't change much. They were the number 1 rush offense last year in terms of attempts, or 30th in pass attempts, I should say. 32 is a good sign. I still think they're going to run more than they pass this year. Jalen Hurts, elite fantasy quarterback, still questions as to whether or not he's going to get it done, as a real life quarterback. But hard not to like this whole game unless you're a Devonta Smith fan.
Pivoting to our next topic, fantasy football losers. And I guess we could couple this with week 1 overreactions as well. plenty of players in this pool to choose from, and in terms of absolute losers and potential fantasy football busts. Who is one player that sticks out to you?
I'll go Alvin Kamara. And really was just disappointing to see. He got off to a pretty good start, and then we see Taysom Hill come into the game, and I thought the Taysom Hill days was behind us. I really did. I thought he was going to line up more as a tight end. I thought it was going to be more traditional offense, and it just wasn't. And then they go down huge, and Kamara's still just not really involved in the passing game. I mean, 4 targets is nice. But the entire second half was Michael Thomas and Jarvis Landry, and that's how the Saints battled back. And there was no sign of Alvin Kamara anywhere. So for a guy that we all got it, I won't say excited for, but pretty much when they announced that his court date was pushed back, it was kind of like the green light to take Kamara. He started pushing him up our draft boards,
Right.
and in maybe the most cupcake matchup on the board for all of week 1, he just let all of us down. 9 carries. I mean, just 12 touches in a game. Again, this has been one of the most prolific pass catchers in fantasy football out of the backfield, and just 3 catches for 7 yards. It was a really extremely disappointing outing for Alvin Kamara.
One player I was really disappointed in over on the West Coast, I don't really know what was going on with Mike Williams. He only had 2 catches, 10 yards on 4 targets. Now, Justin Herbert did a very, very, very good job of spreading the ball around. Only 34 pass attempts, but it's the AFC West. There will be bigger shootouts. There's no doubt about it. The Raiders-Chargers game was a bit of a dud in terms of offensive production, only 43 total points. But Mike Williams, I'm concerned, but at least, there is a window if Keenan Allen's injury is a problem. Right. Mike Williams, eventually he did, get his breakout, but there are still instances in his career where, last year against Denver in, I think it was week 17, he only had 4 targets. And then if you look at his game log from even a year ago, there are about half of his games where he's getting 6 or fewer targets. And so Mike Williams is not going to be a consistent fantasy contributor. Now he's going to have big games. There will be games when he's targeted at least 12 times. Could very well happen next week. But overall, Mike Williams is a big bust for me. And that was a guy that I was moderately heavy on in DFS, and he was one player that just didn't come through. But overall, I was very surprised that with how much Justin Herbert and the Chargers spread the ball around on offense.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're 100% correct. But, when we think about Mike Williams, I mean, think about his career and his first 1,000-yard season, he had 50 receptions. Yeah. So talk about being completely boom or bust, right? This guy is literally just stretching the field. He's catching all of his passes, vertically. And yes, he is a uber talented guy, but as long as Keenan Allen's around, all those routes underneath are all going to Keenan Allen. Well, Williams is taking the top off. There is word that Keenan Allen unlikely for week 2. They play Thursday. That would be a very quick turnaround. Mm-hmm. Tough game for them to not have Keenan Allen, considering it's the Chiefs, but yep. It is what it is. You have to like him. I think it is definitely concerning, giving his career ups and downs, like you said, and but it's hard not to like him, even though the ball is spread out so well. It's hard not to like him if there's no Keenan Allen on the field, which that's what it looks like, at least for week 2. And we don't know what's to come after that. But I'm going to go right back to the well with Mike Williams, but definitely disappointing in week 2. Or week 2.
Who is going to be your favorite waiver wire target for the upcoming period?
Favorite waiver wire target. I mean, so I took not that I took a 0 RB approach this year, Dan, but I was very heavily anchor RB. So I definitely don't have RB depth in a lot of places. So I'll most likely be attacking Jeff Wilson Jr. hard. And I know Deebo Samuel is going to be available, or is going to be probably the running back one in San Francisco. So like, we are contending with that fact. But, Jeff Wilson did have 9 carries in a game that they were trailing for almost all of it. And we don't really think of Jeff Wilson as a guy who is going to catch passes, but he's a good runner when he's healthy. And I think this first game, like, I don't know how you feel about that game against the Bears, but like very hard to judge the Niners offense, really anyone in that game, just considering the weather and considering what it looked like. Like, it was just a mess. I do like Jeff Wilson being in for 18 snaps in the backfield, which was, the most they had. So Jeff Wilson is probably in most places for me going to be my priority pickup, especially, and that should be, the case for a lot of teams that did go, heavy with the receiver route or tight end or just other positions other than running backs, because I think anchor RB has become kind of a popular approach. Just taking the best player essentially. And usually when you get into those middle rounds of your draft, it's not a running back. So I'm going to go Jeff Wilson Jr. as my top overall pickup so far.
Sticking with 49ers running backs, I think people in deeper leagues can also consider Jordan Mason. Sure. Undrafted rookie running back, did get 5 snaps on Sunday. I'll be real quick. I think that if he's available in shallower leagues, Tyler Boyd is one player that I really want to be adding at wide receiver. If T. Higgins is going to miss a few games, Tyler Boyd is in line for a much bigger role. He could easily see anywhere from 7 to 8, maybe even 11 targets a game. That they're not per game. I'm not going to say per game because we don't know how long Higgins is going to be out yet. But Tyler Boyd could be a very popular commodity for a Bengals team that really wants to bounce back. Hard to believe both Super Bowl teams lost in week 1, although the Rams did lose to the Bills. But injury news, we can just kind of go rapid fire through here. Dak Prescott injured his thumb. He did have surgery this week, or today actually. He's out 6 to 8 weeks. How likely are you to be starting CeeDee Lamb, Ezekiel Elliott with Cooper Rush at quarterback?
This is a backbreaker, huh?
You want to know what sucks is that Ezekiel Elliott was looking really good too.
Well, are you?
But now defenses can just stack the box.
Are you saying he was looking good because his helmet he looked like a Power Ranger, or because he was looking spry? Because I think a little bit of both. I think the Power Ranger look suits Zeke. Man, CeeDee Lamb season is over before it even started, dude. I mean, I think if there is anybody I feel comfortable with, it's probably those two guys. Like, obviously Dalton Schultz, huge hit. I think CeeDee Lamb is a flex play with Cooper Rush at best. I think Zeke probably the same thing. I guess it all depends on roster depth, but like outside of Lamb, outside of Zeke, and I will say Tony Pollard only played 2 less snaps than Zeke. So all those 3 are probably flexes. CeeDee Lamb, probably still in that wide receiver 2 discussion. But Cooper Rush, I mean, I don't really know what to say about him. He beat the Vikings last year, right? That was his one shining moment, and then he looked terrible in preseason this year. So, gonna be tough.
Skip Bayless seems to think that he can be just as good as Dak Prescott.
Yeah, well, I've had Skip Bayless muted on Twitter for the last 10 years for that reason exactly. He's out of his mind.
Some bad news in the Monday Night Football game. Jamal Adams was carted off the field, and that could be potentially disastrous for Seattle's secondary. Chris Godwin dealing with a hamstring injury. We've already talked about Keenan Allen and Elijah Mitchell, but regarding Godwin, who is the next man up for the Tampa Bay Bucks? Is it once again Julio Jones' season? Can we see him turn back the clock?
It could be. He looked good. Didn't he look good? He looked
really good.
And so again, it's like it's very bad of us, especially as analysts, to like predict injury. And obviously he has not been healthy. I understand that, right? there has been constant injury.
Even in game, like he will break off a big play and then he
Right.
comes up limping and he just has to go to the sideline for a play or two. Like
Right.
that's just his MO.
But does I mean, what? He's not injured now, right? So if he's healthy now, I have no problem going to Godwin or to going to Julio Jones. I have no problem, maybe even giving Russell Gage a look in deep formats either. So I think those two are instantly, catapulted to the front. And obviously, without Godwin, Mike Evans just going to continue to be a monster.
This week's edition of Are They Bad? The Green Bay Packers are 0-1. They lost an absolute snooze fest to the Minnesota Vikings, 23-7. Are the Packers bad?
I think. I think it's a little bit of both. I think the Vikings are actually pretty good, but the Packers' offensive line kind of stinks, and they are an absolute mess at receiver. Christian Watson dropped that. Dropped that touchdown. I don't know if you saw Aaron Rodgers on the hot mic, on the mic, but there was at least 500 F-bombs, and it was the first quarter alone.
Yep.
I'm not, overreaction Monday, right? For a reason. I'm not ready to bury them completely, but I'm not sure they're bad, but I'm not sure they're good either.
I'm not going to say that they're bad right now. I still think that they're good. Remember last year, week 1, the Packers had a disastrous start in that game as well.
Yeah, sure.
I almost wanted to throw the 49ers in this conversation as well because they lost in a game that was slightly impacted by weather. I actually thought the weather was worse pregame and late in the second half than it was for most of the game. I thought that the conditions were relatively playable. And the 49ers and Trey Lance, sure, they lost Elijah Mitchell, but it's probably a good thing that the 49ers locked up Jimmy Garoppolo because it's possible that the 49ers could sit Lance and bring in Garoppolo if they want to, if they get in too deep of a hole too quickly. And we thought that the 49ers and Trey Lance had a very easy schedule to start. And right now, we're watching, the 49ers lost to the Bears and we're watching the Seahawks give the Broncos a decent game so far. And maybe we need to really pump the brakes on Trey Lance because he could be benched if this team isn't winning.
Let me just ask you a follow-up question then. Because I do think the weather was quite bad, and I don't think pre-game to game time to I don't think that there was a chance for them to really get the field in great condition. How many games does Trey Lance or what's the first game you suspect Jimmy G plays if they struggle? So here's their schedule: Bears, Seahawks, Broncos, Rams. If they're 1-3, 0-4, is he still on the field?
I think we could see Jimmy G as soon as the Rams game.
That's a prime time. So the Broncos game in Denver is a primetime game, and then the following week is another primetime game, ESPN Monday Night Football. Is that if they're 0-3, do they go to Jimmy G?
If they're 0-3 going into a game against the Rams in primetime, I don't see how they gamble on Trey Lance and potentially going 0-4 in a very competitive division.
They have a good team.
When this is a team that has Super Bowl aspirations. This isn't a team that can really wait around and see what and just be patient with their rookie quarterback. This is a team that can make the Super Bowl, and they simply cannot afford to just let the Trey Lance experiment play out. You have Jimmy Garoppolo who has taken this team deep into the playoffs before, and he's on a friendly contract for the team, and he's getting paid $7 million basically to be a backup, but he still wants to play for a contract next year. And he's probably hoping that the team can start 0-3 so he can come back and turn the season around.
Wow, what a pessimist you are.
I'm being a realist. He definitely wants to lock in his next contract. The only way he's going to be able to do that is if he gets in there and can play. And it's very reasonable to think that this 49ers could lose next week to Seattle. They were in an absolute dumpster fire this week, and they could lose to Denver against Russell Wilson and company, and then they could be at best 1-2, in my opinion, against the heading into the Rams. And I really don't think they want to fall to 1-3 or 0-4.
I definitely think they're 1-1 going into week 3. I think they're going to beat Seattle. Anything can happen. It's football. It's crazy, right? Kevin Garnett taught us that anything is possible. But I think they're 1-1 going into week 3. And I think if they have a win on the board, I don't think they make the swap. But I don't think he gets past, like, if they're 1-4 going into like week 6, I think, the plug is pulled and we see Garoppolo. But I'm not ready to bury Trey Lance just yet. Give him a couple more weeks, and let's see how this thing plays out.
All right, wrap it up with Believe It or Not.
All right, Dan. First question. First, Believe It or Not. Coming into the Monday Night Football game, Carson Wentz, Marcus Mariota, and Jameis Winston are all currently a QB1 in 12-team leagues. Do you believe, Dan Malin, that one or more of those 3 will finish a QB1 by year's end?
No.
0.
I think the only one that realistically has a chance is Jameis Winston.
Okay.
I don't really necessarily buy stock into Mariota. I think that there could be a time where the Falcons want to see what they have elsewhere at the quarterback position. Carson Wentz, I find it very hard to believe that he can even produce a wide receiver 1, and so I don't really think that he can hold up for a full season as a QB1. If we're talking a 12-team league, there are easily 12 quarterbacks that I would rather have for the remainder of a full season than in any of these 3.
Well, this is why we play the week 1 overreaction game. Last but not least, Dan, Michael Carter of the New York Jets, no, not the defensive Michael Carter, but the offensive Michael Carter, the running back, had 17 touches compared to Breece Hall's 12. Do you believe that Michael Carter will have more touches than the 4th-round draft pick, Breece Hall, 4th-round draft pick in your fantasy leagues by year's end?
I don't. I think that the Jets are going to be a team that are going to lose more than they win. And at a certain point, you have to start featuring and getting a return on your investment. And they took Breece Hall in the 2nd round of April's draft. I think it was a 2nd-round pick. Michael Carter is a nice addition. I think that everyone in the organization knows that he is not a franchise running back. He's not someone that they want to allow to touch the ball significantly more than Breece Hall. Hall is an absolute animal. He's an incredible physical specimen. He should be getting the 17 touches to Carter's 12, in my opinion. But it's week 1. He's a rookie running back. They're not going to go all in on him just yet. But if they keep losing, it's kind of like the 49ers situation. Eventually your hand is forced. And, I wouldn't be surprised if, one, they do it just to like sell tickets, even though I'm pretty sure they've already sold out all their games. But I feel like Saleh has to eventually feel like the seat is getting a little bit warm, and you need to see what you can get or what you have with these, these young prospects that you invested so much draft capital in. So I think that we probably see Carter over the next 1 or 2 games, probably out-touch Hall, but eventually you'll see that transition. It's very similar to what happened in Denver with Melvin Gordon and Javonte Williams, whereas now Javonte Williams in year 2 is the presumed, quote-unquote guy in that backfield. It's not going to happen for Hall this year, but I think as the season progresses, there will be an adjustment to the mean. So I'm not overreacting to Michael Carter's heavy workload. Sure, it's nice, but it does nothing to move the needle for me.
I will say it's not like they didn't invest in Michael Carter in the draft either 2 years ago, taking him in the 4th round. I mean, we've seen plenty of late round running backs be successful and, become starting running backs in the league over someone that's, was suspected to be the guy. So, i.e. the 49ers situation just last year with Trey Sermon, who's no longer on the team a year after being drafted, and Elijah Mitchell being taken the 7th round. So just throwing that out there. Just throwing that little caveat out there. I don't necessarily disagree with you, but I also think it's interesting to an interesting situation to monitor because Carter was, clearly the RB1 to start this season for them.
And I was actually really high on Breece Hall in draft season. We did the player debate. I did it with Brett Flynn, and I argued as to why you should be taking Breece Hall. And gradually, it felt like almost a day or two after the article was published, it seemed like we were getting those reports that it was going to be a committee to start the year, and that obviously killed my momentum regarding Breece Hall. But I think that he'll finish strong. He's such a special player, and I don't fault the Jets for taking him in the second round. But I also think like if you're going to take him in the second round, just get your usage out of him. Like show us why you decided to take him in the second round. Like it's football. Like you may want to protect the guy and not overrun him, but at the same time, like no one is free from injury in this game, and he is at a more injury prone position. But at the same time, like I want to see him with the ball in his hands. I think he's the best.
Right.
He is the best running back that they have. But the Jets are going to suck no matter what. It's like death taxes to the Jets.
Whoa! Oh my gosh, Jet fans, duck. Dan Malin taking shots, duck and cover, please.
I'm saying this as a Patriots fan, and I fully expect the Patriots to maybe win 4 games this year.
More wins, Jets or Patriots this year?
The Patriots.
Ooh, still going with the Patriots, huh? Even though Zach Wilson got that dog.
The Patriots will win 2 games against the Jets.
No, that's fair. That's fair.
But that will wrap it up for our Week 1 recap. Grande, thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to doing this the rest of the season, and we will be back next week recapping Week 2.